I can remember as far back as the '82 war, the invasion of Lebanon, then the U.S. bombing of Lebanon in 1986, the first Gulf War in '91, the second Gulf War in 2003, and so many things in between. And the one thing I do remember from all those is the disinformation that really created the hysteria in this country in particular to justify war, bombing civilians, and what amounts to war crimes. And I think what we're seeing today is exactly the same thing. I remember vividly 1991, and we were no fans of Saddam Hussein. And Iraq invaded Kuwait, it was horrible. And then there were stories that Iraqi soldiers were throwing Kuwaiti babies out of incubators. And then later, the governments, both the Kuwaiti and the US government, admitted that that was a part of the disinformation campaign. And we don't know what's true and what's false today. We can only rely on what we witness, but definitely the time to verify information is more critical now than ever, simply because of what's at stake. What is at stake is a regional war. Well, more than that, what's at stake, first of all, is the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, and a regional war that may be another repercussion of it, and more of the war machine taking its toll on the people of the region, and the United States losing more and more credibility, and a media that is becoming not just, I mean, one-sided is actually being very polite and diplomatic when we say that the media is one-sided. So our panelists are going to be giving us reflections on what they've seen in the weekend, and we have some action items at the end. But before we do that, I wanted a spokesperson from the Islamic Center of Southern California to come out and explain and present the statement issued by the Islamic Center. And that's Omar Ricci.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Honestly, I don't want to be here. Right? Who wants to be here? It's yet again, and look, we have our statement. Can I just, by show of hands, how many people have seen the statement or read the statement? Okay. The statement is available on paper form in the back here. If you take a look at it, it's also on our website, IslamicCenter.com. I'm not going to read the entire statement, but there's basically 5 points to the statement. 5 points to the statement. The first point is, let's not let what is happening over there spill over here. There's violence in that part of the world. Let us, if we consider America, the United States our home, let's not let that spill over. That's not to say we're not enraged. That's not to say that we're not passionate. And we, as you will hear, must do something. But let's not let the violence spill here to this country. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I can tell you from yesterday, if any of you have heard about the demonstration in West LA yesterday, the pro-Palestinian demonstration, there were clashes between a small group of Israelis who showed a pro-Israeli group with the Palestinians, and there was pepper spraying. It wasn't major, it wasn't severe, but it was an act of violence. It's time for us to make sure that that does not spill over to the nation here that we are a part of. And unfortunately, I can tell you, one of our community members who lives in Beverly Hills, her daughter has been bullied quite severely. Yeah. Actually, an act of violence was committed against the daughter. I don't want to say what that act was, but an elementary school girl who lives in Beverly Hills has been impacted and affected. We're expecting the city of Beverly Hills and the school district of Beverly Hills to do something about it. The second thing is, we all, I'm going to say in this room here, have a certain level of anger, a certain level of frustration, a certain level of emotion about what is going on in that part of the world and what has happened in that part of the world. No matter our level of anger, we cannot let that bias in our heart override our faith. What I mean by that is that killing of innocent people, no matter of what background, as the Quran teaches us, as we as Muslims believe, overrides, we condemn that no matter what, and we don't say that to curry favor or to act like we're trying to, it's because our faith teaches us that. Let us always remember rather, that this life is very temporary. Let's keep square with God. And there's verses in the statement about that. The third thing is, I'm gonna sort of go through this quickly. This is highlighting the occupation and the apartheid treatment of Palestinians, and that this is really a slow-moving genocide. The fourth thing, really, Western media, who's going to trust them? Right? Are they telling you the story? Of course not. As a matter of fact, quite simply, it's Zionist propaganda. And it sounds extreme for me to say that, but let's call a spade a spade. All right, let's call a spade a spade. There's no point trying to be tap dancing around that anymore. And the fifth thing that we say in the statement is that our country has lost its credibility a long time ago in that part of the world. It lost its credibility a long time ago in that part of the world. What it is now losing is its soul. What it is now losing is its soul. It is up to us as Muslims and Christians and Jews who believe in what America's promise is about to act and to move forward. And so now, coming to the action items, I'll just say one thing about this. I don't want to skim over this, make dua. Okay, that's one of the things you'll read on the statement there. I don't want to minimize that. That is extraordinarily important. The second thing is, and we have here places where you can go to contact the White House, contact your elected officials, contact your local representatives. By the way, who's done all that in the past? What has it resulted in? Nothing. Nothing, right? So now take the next step. What's the next step? And this is going to require some courage. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to your friends. We can't change the minds of a politician that's been bought. We can't change the mind of a media editor who is biased. Talk to your neighbors. Change won't happen tomorrow, but change will happen in a generation. Talk to your coworkers. Talk to people who you can engage with. Be sensible. I get it. You speak up about the Palestinian cause, you put yourself at risk. I can tell you that from some WhatsApp groups and that I'm on, that just neighborhood who are already like brainwashed by what's going on. But so be sensible, but don't stay quiet. And it's going to take each and every one of us. Media will change, inshallah. We don't know when that's going to happen. What we can do is be courageous and take a step. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. The only addendum I would add to what Omar says, we should keep calling our representatives. If for nothing else, understand that the number of people who are supporting us but are quiet, are silenced by the government stand on this, you would not imagine how many people there are. So let us keep speaking, because they use our statements as a way to leverage what's happening in their offices, whether it's an office of the Congress or an office of the State Department or an office of the White House. Even I've heard from our allies, including Muslims who work there, is that we need to hear more from our community, because they use the statements to tell their colleagues inside that this is the sentiment of the Muslim community, and it has to be considered in their decision-making process. So we're still a long way from realizing any change in policy, but still, whatever little we can do, we should keep doing. So I just want to add that addendum to Omar's comments. Our esteemed panel here, these are people that have been on the front lines in terms of fighting the war for the truth, and have been staunch allies of our community, for our community, and for justice. And so I'd like to go in order, and maybe each of you can share a few thoughts for 5 minutes. We'll take questions from the audience, and then we can close 5 minutes of each person. If you want to take 10 minutes at the beginning, don't. But we'll try to go in that order. And I apologize, this has been, obviously, we organized this as last minute, but I really appreciate your patience. And also, let's give them a round of applause for their responsiveness in answering the call, to do the to be with us today. So I'd like to start with Reinhard Krauss, who has a very personal perspective on this issue. Reinhard is involved with the Center for Judaic, Christian, and Islamic Studies, thank you, at UCLA, and again, a very important interfaith partner for the Islamic Center of Southern California. Dr. Reinhard Krauss.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here with you today, and I especially thank my dear friend and sister Hidab Tarifi for inviting me to be part of this forum. As you hear from my accent, as soon as I open my mouth, I'm German. I'm an immigrant to this country like some of you are. And each of us is born into a particular context. We did not make the choice of the context, the religion, the culture we were born into. I was born 10 years after the end of the war, Second World War, the Holocaust in Germany. I've wrestled my whole life with what my people did to 6 million Jews, to 500,000 Sinti and Roma, to thousands of the LGBT community, and to political dissidents who dared to speak up for the truth. And people were led to wholesale slaughter, men, women, children, the young, the elderly, indiscriminately, for belonging to a particular group. What Hamas did in the last week evokes the worst fears and memories of the Jewish people. It touches their core identity in a way that I think, if we're not part of the Jewish community, we cannot imagine. And I think that is one thing that touches me very deeply. When the Israeli government, in response to that atrocity, now gives the order to Palestinians in Gaza, where my dear sister Hidab was born, gives the order to either leave your home or be killed. It touches on the deepest memories and fears and horrors of the Palestinian people, namely what has come to be known as the Nakba. Are we going to watch a second Nakba broadcast live on TV despite the suppression of the news? I fear for the worst, of 3.5 million people to be without water. We know how long you can survive without water and without food. Men, women, and children indiscriminately. Where do I stand? On whose side am I on? I'm on the side of the people and the victims and the human beings that are being slaughtered indiscriminately. And I think our faith, I'm a Christian, our faith tells us that each human being is created by God and each human life is precious. And we must not forget that we need to stand with all human beings. It is very easy to say we are part of one group and demonize the other. I believe we must resist that urge to the best of our ability in the midst of our grief, in the midst of our rage, in the midst of our indignation. And then we must speak, as Salam said, to our neighbors, to our friends, to our colleagues, and stand up for what we believe is the case, despite the opposition and sometimes the hatred we may fear. And so that's why it is an honor for me to be here with you as a fellow human being, as a brother in the larger sense, as a Muslim who is devoted to God. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reinhard. Thank you, Reinhard. You guys- Thank you, Reinhard, for that very personal yet very compelling testimony and remarks. I really appreciate everything that you have said and from where you said it. And now we'll go to S.T. Chandler, who runs Jewish Voices for Peace, and definitely has been on the forefront of fighting for the truth against various powers. I know that, like us, ST has been attacked in several ways and has been ostracized in her own community, but she's one of the most courageous souls that I know, and so we're really proud to have her by our side. She runs Jewish Voices for Peace.
Thank you, Salam, for your generosity. I want to thank the Islamic Center for putting on this important conversation. I also want to reiterate what Salam said. If you pray five times a day, I'm asking you one more time of the day to make 4 phone calls to both your senator's offices, your congressional rep, and to a friend who you're going to ask to make those same calls every single day with you going forward. I promise you, it matters. It matters so much right now. I want to say that reality is shaped by when you start the clock. In recent weeks, for some context, Israeli forces have repeatedly stormed the holiest Muslim sites in Jerusalem. For years, Palestinian children have been routinely dragged from their beds in pre-dawn raids by Israeli soldiers and held without charge in Israeli military prisons. For the past year, the most racist, fundamentalist, far-right government in Israeli history has ruthlessly escalated its military occupation over Palestinians in the name of Jewish supremacy, with violent expulsions, home demolitions, mass killings, and military raids on refugee camps, and in addition to the unrelenting siege and daily humiliation. For 16 years now, the Israeli government has suffocated Palestinians in Gaza under a draconian air, sea, and land military blockade, imprisoning and starving over 2 million people and denying them basic medical aid. The Israeli government routinely massacres Palestinians in Gaza. A 15-year-old in Gaza has already been traumatized by 7 major bombing campaigns in their short lives. And at the root of it all, for 75 years, the Israeli government has maintained a military occupation over Palestinians, operating an apartheid regime. That is not an admonishment, that is a legal definition. Palestinian homes that we watched all summer being torched by mobs of Israeli settlers or destroyed by the Israeli army. And entire Palestinian villages have been forced to flee, abandoning their homes, orchards, and land where their families have lived for generations. This last week, the Israeli government may have declared war on Hamas, But we have to look at things in context. Israel's war on Palestinians started over 75 years ago. Israeli apartheid and occupation, and very importantly, U.S. government complicity in that oppression are the source of the horrific violence we are all witnessing. And the Israeli government has now declared a genocidal war on the people of Gaza, and our government has endorsed it. Our tax dollars will help pay for it. The Israeli government has shut off all electricity to Gaza, collective punishment. Hospitals can no longer save lives there. The internet is collapsing, and people will have no phones to communicate with the outside world. Drinking water for 2 million people is running out. We heard this morning that it will be turned back on, but let's wait and watch and see if they in fact do what they said they would do. Top Israeli officials have stated their intention to commit mass atrocities. I'm sorry to say, including genocide. And in response, and this is why our phone calls are so important, yesterday a memo was released shortly after, or 2 days ago, shortly after the Israeli government ordered 1 million Gazans to evacuate their homes within 24 hours, admonishing U.S. State Department diplomats not to publish press pieces containing the phrases "end to violence" or "bloodshed." Don't say "restoring calm." Don't say de-escalation or ceasefire. We need to tell them all every day that is exactly what they should be calling for. Friends, from where we sit here, there simply are no sidelines. We have to uproot complicity here. We have to demand that the U.S. government immediately take steps to withdraw military funding to Israel and to hold the Israeli government accountable for its gross violations of human rights and war crimes against Palestinians. We all know from our own histories that oppressed people everywhere will seek and gain their freedom. And the more that Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims are dehumanized, the harder they're going to fight. And the more the mainstream media parrots that dehumanization, the longer they're going to remember. We all deserve liberation. We all deserve safety and equality. And the only way to get there is to uproot the sources of violence, beginning with our own government's complicity. Reality is shaped by when you start the clock. Palestinians will never forget, and neither should any of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Esty. I think we'll have a lot to talk about from your comments as well, so we look forward to the discussion after this. Next, I'd like to invite Randy Hein-Lam. He's with the Middle East Ministry at All Saints Church. And one of the things that is forgotten, especially in the current narrative in our own media, the United States, is that this involves a number of Palestinian Christians, as well as Muslims, as well as people of other faiths. This is not an Islam versus Judaism problem. This is a problem involving power used to kick out people from their homes, to silence them, to kill them, and to continue the aggression against the Palestinian people, some of whom, a significant portion actually, are Christian. And so many Christians in our own society are now struggling with this notion of Christian Zionism and how it helped to support the aggression against the Palestinian people. And I have to say, of all the churches, I would say that the Episcopalian Church has been at the forefront of coming out with the truth and saying we have to also side with our Palestinian Christian brothers and sisters and speak out against this kind of aggression, and including taking on the option of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the Israeli government. So I want to thank personally the church at All Saints, the Episcopalian Church, but I know that Randy has been at the forefront of this campaign, so I want to thank you personally, Randy, for doing that work in the name of justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be here, and thank you for giving the first paragraph of my speech here. You know, I do want to thank you for your kind words, and I'd probably also make a few corrections here as we talk. I just want to make one statement here at the very beginning. My comments here are not the official policy of the All Saints Church. They are my particular position and my involvement with not only All Saints as the co-chair, along with my wife who's at the church right now, trying to talk with people who are necessarily distraught over what's going on. And so I came down here while she stayed there and did the harder job, I think, of addressing those emotional struggles. Yes, there is a Christian presence still in the Holy Land. There's a Christian presence in Gaza. One of the oldest churches in Christendom, St. Porphyrius Church, is in East Gaza. The current structure dates back to the 6th century. It's a beautiful structure that is open to all to come in and pray and worship. And it is in the heart of a community that was heavily bombed in this past week. In that same neighborhood, the homes of the executive director and the medical director of an Episcopal hospital that is there, called the Al-Akhli Hospital in Gaza. Those homes were destroyed in that bombing. Fortunately, both the executive and medical director were at the hospital, putting in extra hours, sleeping at the hospital, so they were okay. But the hospital itself was struck by bombs just 2 nights ago, destroying both the mammography suite, which was the only one in Gaza that was there. Obviously, mammograms right now are probably not a high priority with everything else that's going on, but it was something that had been worked on long time to get the permission from the Israelis to bring in the necessary nuclear materials to do x-rays. And that, and along with the ultrasound suite, were heavily damaged. So yes, there is a Christian presence within Gaza. There is certainly a Christian presence within the West Bank and Jerusalem. You've probably all heard about the troubles that have been going on with even those Christian Zionist visitors that come to Israel on pilgrimage and never meet a Palestinian Christian. But that's another subject we could go into. That they're increasingly being confronted by settlers and by yeshiva boys who spit at them as they walk by. Now that's spitting at someone seems so minor compared to what's going on. The problem we have in some ways with the Christian church, and this is I think one of the things I wanted to address in speaking up for Palestinians, whether they be Christian or Muslim, it doesn't really matter, is the historic guilt that the Christian church has over the Holocaust and over the pogroms that occurred in Russia and in other areas of the world throughout centuries. Professor Mark Ellis, who used to be down at Baylor and made these comments when he was a professor down there, talked about an ecumenical deal. And what he meant by that ecumenical deal is that Jews will not criticize, at least not too much, Christians for their long history of anti-Semitism. if we don't criticize Israel. And that ecumenical deal is seen even in places like All Saints, I'm afraid to say. I'm very sad here this morning because when I got to church this morning, I went to there before I came here, I was expecting to be able to help pass out and receive signatures to a letter that we were going to send to Congress, asking them to de-escalate, asking them to step back from their support, their wholehearted support of Israel militarily. And I found out that that letter had been pulled because it was perceived as too radical, too one-sided, that in my rector's discussions with his colleagues, both within the church and outside with Jewish colleagues, they had decided that they needed to pull that letter. And so it didn't get signed today. Now, 100 signatures doesn't mean a whole lot, probably 150 signatures, that doesn't mean a whole lot in getting them to our elected officials probably, but it is something, and it is something that I encourage. And very frankly, I'm going to add, everyone's been saying, oh, you guys need to write to your elected officials. I'm going to put something back on the leadership and say, you need to help me at All Saints. You need to help your Christian brothers and sisters on this with whom you have relationship by getting up in our faces, by saying to Mike and to others in our leadership, where is All Saints' voice on this? Where are you going to, if we couldn't come up with a statement, even if they decided to trash the ones that we had already worked on and supposedly was approved, if we can't come up with a statement to our elected officials that says, de-escalate, disarm, step back from the violence, save lives, then where can we stand? And so I would encourage the leadership of this mosque, with whom we've had a long and fruitful relationship, to do more work, to get up in the faces of the leadership of not only All Saints. How many churches are around here within a mile's distance of here? Churches with whom you have relationships, perhaps. Emmanuel Presbyterian comes to mind, where so many of the ICUJP meetings were held when they were back there and held in person. Other churches with whom you have relationship. The leadership of this mosque should be on the phone and saying, how can we stand together and what can we say together? What can we do as far as you coming down and standing with us here in front of the Islamic Center of Southern California and doing a press conference? What kind of things can you do with us? So I'm not trying to take away any of the blame that we share for not being able to get our act together. But I do encourage you to, and especially the leadership, to speak out more forcefully. There are other remarks that I was planning to go into, and maybe I'll have that in the second round, but thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Randy. And so we'll just add, in addition to calling your members of Congress, call your local church, and ask either Islamic Center or MPAC leadership to join you in talking to our churches in our neighborhoods.
Develop relationship.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. So thank you, Randy, for that. And as I said earlier, our allies are asking us to speak out more. So don't think that our words are not being heard. They're being heard. They may not register in what I don't want to call it mainstream media, but you know what I'm talking about. But they are heard by people. And as I was, and in fact, another thing that Randy was alluding to reminded me that I had a call with somebody in the city council, or not city council, in the mayor's office. And they said, we're going to have to walk the line, but we need you to speak out more because that will help counter what we're hearing from the other side. So please, every word counts, and don't hold back, please. And if you need assistance in talking points and who to call, we're here to help with that. I want to go to a person that I've been personally involved with, I think since 1982. As I said, the first crisis in the invasion of Lebanon, and somebody that, who can provide us historical context. I really encourage you to really tap into his knowledge and his expertise, because he's seen it all, and he's been with us from the beginning. And I consider him not just a friend, but a hero, one of our unsung heroes in our community. He was a professor at Cal Poly Pomona on Middle East Studies, and he's definitely an expert. And I wish people like him are more on our TV stations than what we have to listen to these days. So please welcome Dr. Mahmoud Ibrahim.
Thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this panel. I was in my mother's belly when the town that I would have grown in was ethnically cleansed on July 12th, 1948. The town of Jinzu was forcibly evacuated. In the central part of Palestine, this was amongst many other villages, 535 villages or so were destroyed from 1948 to 1950 to prevent the Palestinians from coming back. So I was born actually in Ramallah, on the way to the refugee camp that was being set up for the Palestinians in Aqbat Jabr in Jericho, which continues to be there today. So I was born in Ramallah, and I was born actually in a Quaker school. The American Friends Committee turned its high school in Ramallah into a field hospital, and I was born there. And I grew up in the first 2 years of my life in the refugee camp in Aqbat Jabr, and fortunately, the luck of the life or whatever, my father was able to land a job as a miller in a mill near Ramallah. And that was our journey from, emancipating from the refugee camps that many thousands of Palestinians have not been able to do so since 1948 and since 1967 with the second Nakba and the second major ethnic cleansing. So the language that I hear about myself, the language that I hear about my people, the language that I hear about people I know and I have broken bread with, is a language of dehumanization. Let's start with that. And this is not the first time, because Israel has attacked Gaza several times already. And I want to perhaps to give you a synopsis of how this progresses. In my belief, it was actually the assassination of Rabin that started the whole process downhill between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because there was a segment of Israeli society that did not want peace. And that's why Rabin was assassinated. And of course, that brought us the prime ministership of Netanyahu, who is also currently a prime minister. And indeed, this is exactly what he wants, and he has been doing ever since, to scuttle any peace agreement between the Palestinians and Israel. And at least two of the wars that Israel carried against Gaza, the 2012, the 2014, were directly in response to a Palestinian attempt at reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, which of course Israel always considered a threat to its security, and therefore they opposed it and then bring the war on. So from 1995, 96, I don't exactly remember when Rabin was assassinated, we have the second Intifada. And the second Intifada lasted for several years. Perhaps some people date the end of it at 2005, when there was an agreement, a ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinians on the one hand, the West Bank, and also Hamas in Israel. That agreement very quickly was violated, and the violations, I must say, was coming from both sides. It's not always the Palestinians who will fire first. And Israel, of course, always uses it as a retaliation, the right to defend themselves, as if the Palestinians don't have the right to defend themselves too. Yes, the Palestinians have the right to resist, and they have the legal right to resist by any means necessary the occupying force. That's enshrined in international law. It's legal. What Israel is doing is illegal. They have done that several times. I mentioned 2008, 2009. This was the first major incursion after they had evacuated. Remember, Ariel Sharon evacuated Gaza because the occupation of Gaza had become too costly for Israel. Therefore, they withdrew unilaterally without consultation with the Palestinians who were in Gaza, or the PLO, or the Palestine Authority, or anybody else, or their allies. They just left and left the place in chaos. And of course, at that time, the Fatah, PLO, and the Hamas are going to struggle for supremacy, and indeed, eventually, Hamas won an election in 2006 that triggered a moment of reconciliation. Of course, that was, again, unacceptable as far as the United States and Israel. They demanded Hamas to recognize Israel's right to exist, to renounce violence, and to abide by all of the agreements reached between the PLO and Israel previously. Hamas said this is not acceptable, and therefore the war on Hamas was declared. By then, Israel declared it a hostile territory and blockaded sea, air, everything, isolated, made the Gaza an open-air prison, a concentration camp where they can pick and choose where they will hit, and they continued to hit. 2008, then 2012, another major operation. Again, hundreds of Palestinians are killed. The same usual places are bombarded. And believe me, because you can see it on TV, you can see it in documents on social media, they do not discriminate between civilians and non-civilians. And their excuse is that Hamas hides behind civilian elements. But we know from experience. I was in Birzeit from 1985 to 1989 and was there during the first Intifada. And I know the Israeli practices against civilians. It was done to me also. 2014, another deadly incursion. Again, this is probably a couple of thousand casualties. And we call a couple of thousand Palestinians, maybe 10 or 13 Israeli soldiers. 2018 to 2019, we don't figure that in, but in that particular several months, between March 30, 2018, and May 15th, that's about a month and a half. They killed 180 or so Palestinians demonstrating at the fence peacefully. This is called the Masira al-Awda al-Kubra, the Great March of Return. Continued to kill Palestinian civilians, journalists, children, you name it. No one Israeli was killed or injured. Maybe one actually was slightly injured during this period. Now that brings us, of course, to the 221 war again. And that is because of what was happening in Al-Aqsa, because of what was happening in the West Bank, in the incursions. Jenin was raided so many times were killed. Our Senator Padilla was in Israel when the Israeli forces invaded Jenin and killed 12 people. And I called him on it. I had gotten in touch with him. Have you raised this question? There was a picture of him with the president of Israel. I said, have you raised the issue of the Palestinians who were killed in Jenin refugee camp while you're meeting with Herzog? Of course, there's no response. But we have to put them on the spot. When they support genocide, like Lindsey Graham, like Nikki Haley, or like Marco Rubio, calling us savages, calling us barbaric, calling us rapists, calling us baby killers, when in fact all of this was not verified. They had the president of the United States fly on TV. And then they walk back their comment and say, it cannot be verified. But the damage has been done, and this false item continues to be carried on by the news media. So they talk about annihilation, they talk about no restraint, they talk about wiping them out, they talk about leveling the place. That is genocide. We are going to be witness to genocide. Sabra and Shatila will pale in comparison to what these guys are going to do, starting tomorrow or after tomorrow. We have to make them stop. We have to make them not do that by putting the pressure that we can put, as much as we can do. The Israelis call this process of attacking Gaza every couple of years or so, mowing the lawn. They mow the lawn. Now, 70% of the population of Gaza is young kids because they keep mowing the lawn. And this is the new growth. The more you mow the lawn, the greener it comes, the stiffer it gets, the more it will grow, the more resistant to your bombing it will become. And we have cautioned everyone who could listen, because you do not get to the root issue. A ceasefire is not what we want. We want dignity for the Palestinians, we want sovereignty for the Palestinians, we want a state of our own for the Palestinians. And that will end the conflict. That will end the bloodshed, not these half measures that are undermined even in the same process of them being implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Well, we have time for just one or two questions, so we'll just make it really, if you can make it very brief as well. Anybody? Yes, sir. Come on up. And make it a question, not a, we've already heard the lectures, so just make it a question.
Okay. Just going back to the actions that were suggested, I totally agree with them. A lot of things. I know we feel sometimes powerless, but a lot of them I agree with. Just one more thing. I know it's a hard topic to bring to the table, and I would like to hear from our guests here. Our voting power. I feel like as a Muslim, as an Arab minority, American, of course, for all, I feel like disappointed by the people I vote for, that you're not protecting me as for what I am. And I've seen you dehumanizing me, like you said, and not fulfilling on your promises, and you're taking my vote for granted. I know the alternative is very, very painful, and probably the alternative is what created this very extremist government in Israel. But again, what should we do with our votes? It's very painful to go put my vote in the ballot. That I know it's gonna hurt me. Nothing that I want is gonna happen. Just I'm doing it because I'm afraid of the alternative. It's just I'm sick of that situation, and honestly, I can't think of a way out of that. So I'd like to hear that.
Yeah. Sounds like that's a question for me. But does anybody want to take it? Go ahead. Essie.
I think that you need to call those offices and let them know exactly that.
Yes, I think that's the point, is you tell those people that you have initially supported or feel aligned with that they're betraying the values that, that you used to vote for them in the first place. And And by the way, a lot of people in Michigan, a lot of people now in the White House are very worried about losing Michigan over what's happened by Biden himself. So there is some change, and that's one thing I wanted to emphasize. 1982, in dealing with that first crisis that we were all witness to, it's very different from now. We didn't have these many people. We didn't have so many allies. We didn't have people in government. We didn't have Mehdi Hassan and Ayman Mohideen and Ali Velshi, on TV as we do now. So things have changed. Let's not give up. But I agree, it's very difficult. It's a dilemma. But go and speak out to that member. Yes.
Thank you for bringing up the issue that the Christians are there. And my question is like, Les Wexner, he is a board member and he spent millions of dollars for how to PR campaign, what to say, whether they use the word Palestinian or Hamas, or Muslims or Hamas. These words makes a big difference. My pointed question is, if we, the Muslim people, like he said, brother, 95% Christian that even don't know that there are Christians in Gaza. So we have to bring that up. My question is, do we have any planning committee for tactical or strategic PR issues for that purpose?
More questions to me. Yes, the answer short is yes. Does anyone want to talk about the PR? Okay, Randy.
I think your question was directed towards the Christian community as well. So let me at least try to address that. I appreciate what Salam had to say, the positive things he had to say about the Episcopal Church. We're actually somewhere in the middle of the road, I think, in terms of our movement in this. There are other churches that have taken a much stronger stand than we have, including the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ, and several other denominations that have made formal statements. We're actually trying to do this. The Episcopal Church will be having its general convention next year in Louisville, Kentucky in June, and at that we hope to address several resolutions that have come up from churches on naming Israel as an apartheid state. That's a necessary step for us if we're going to be able to criticize that. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's something we are working on, and there are I'm part of what's called the Episcopal Peace Fellowship's Palestine-Israel Network. And so we are trying to work strategically to influence our church. There are these PINs, Palestine-Israel Networks, within just about every major denomination. And we meet together monthly to talk about strategy and to do things. But you're right, it is a hard thing when 95%, especially when you start talking about the evangelical community, don't even know that there are Christians in the West Bank, let alone Gaza. So.
Yeah, I thank you for your question. I think it is incumbent on Christians to also speak up within the Christian community. I call myself a Christian, but I usually follow it, but don't assume that you know what that means. I am horrified that the majority, as I see it in this country, of people who call themselves Christians never have the thought that Jesus could have been serious. Jesus was a pacifist. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Jesus abhorred violence. And people who call themselves Christians, the majority, are condoning weapons, condoning violence, condoning wars. And I think it is incumbent on myself and other Christians to speak up. In fact, I believe Christianity is the religion that has moved farthest away from the teachings of its founder.
I just wanted to briefly address what you said about them choosing these words carefully. They're choosing these words carefully because they want to capture our hearts and minds. And that's the other entity that we need to make sure to be connecting with and calling and emailing. It's the media, whether it's the LA Times, that had a pretty good piece out that Leila Mariati's voice was included in. But whether it's MSNBC or NBC or CBS or ABC or wherever you get your news, we need to be calling them and telling them that the dehumanization of Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs is unacceptable, and that we expect them to do better and to be presenting more diverse voices. It's imperative.
I just want to highlight one thing that Esty said. When you hear a report and you hear three different words, Gazan, Hamas, terrorist, Palestinian, the reason that they're all in that same report in many situations is because they want you to conflate those things. They want you to conflate that every Gazan is a terrorist, that every Palestinian supports Hamas. And we need to speak up against that. We do need to clarify that for these news reporters what they are saying and what they mean by that.
That's I think the two groups that we follow, I think, are important in the Jewish community. Not in our name, and if not now. Can you say a few words about those groups as well?
I actually would add Jewish Voice for Peace to that. So right now, when we look at the landscape, there's only two organizations. I haven't closely followed Not in Our Name, so check me on that. But there's only two organizations that we know that aren't saying, that aren't asking people not to say those words that we should all be saying, de-escalation, that are solely calling for ceasefire, that are solely calling out to stop what is looking like an impending genocide. It's a genocide. And the only two organizations that are saying that publicly and to our representatives right now that we're aware of are If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. And so you will see us out in the community together a lot.
Okay, how about I do one last question, and then we're gonna have to wrap up. I'm really sorry, we're gonna go until 1:15, if that's okay for everybody. We're gonna have to move from this, though. I really apologize. We're gonna have to.
From what I hear today, that Christians and, both Randy and Reinhard, they concentrate on the Holocaust. So, and I hear that both of you, or both of your faith is concentrating on the guilt toward those people. Which is more important is if all faith is concentrate on conscience and justice, why you still have this kind of guilt toward those people if they are doing the same thing? What's happening to Palestinians? Not only genocide, it's Holocaust by the same people who suffered from that. How you can change this mentality and be fair to the Palestinians instead of using this kind of the same card with the Jews, and they started sucking blood from all over the countries, all over the world.
Okay, I'm gonna let you reflect on that and make that, you can address it as part of your closing remarks, but I'm gonna ask Hadab Tarithi to come up and give her remarks in terms of the actions that we're taking here.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm just going to put a disclaimer first that I am standing here in front of you, not necessarily in any capacity with the Islamic Center board or in my capacity as a spokesperson. I am here as Hadab Tarithi, one of you, one from the community, one who happens to be Palestinian, born in Gaza. One who have just lost family and friends in the last 24 hours. I've been trying all week not to get emotional, but just put yourself in my situation where, to me, all Gaza is family. And I want you to just quickly take a visual look. This is the historical Palestine that is now occupied by Israel. And this little spot here is Gaza. This is what the United States is sending to two, not one, aircraft carriers to be right there. I don't know what they're afraid of. This is Gaza. Now, this is a larger one, just so that you understand. I want you to keep an eye on the media. I want you to keep an eye on the news and what they're doing to Gazans. In the last 48 hours, they've been trying to push Gazans from this far. This is city of Gaza. This is where I was born. And all these areas here, from this to this, to this, to this, to this, all these, believe it or not, they're refugee camps. These are Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed in 1948 and forced to move out of Palestine and live in these refugee camps in Gaza. And now, this is what 1948, the Nakba, when Palestinians were made refugees, and I'm one of them, because I was made refugee before I was even born. Just put that in context, just think of it. And now they're being pushed out of this whole area to come to the south in Deir al-Balah. And right as they forced them and told them leave, they started bombing them. Talk about war crimes. This is a clear war crime. And now, as they got to Deir al-Balah, which is most of the Palestinians now in Gaza are right here in Deir al-Balah, they bombed them again. Everybody they said genocide. This is a new level of genocide. We have to find another word for it, because genocide doesn't even give it, the right power of it. And the sad part, it is happening by the blessings of everybody in the world. I am mad, beyond mad, and I don't use usually the word hell, but I am mad as hell. And I'm sure each one of you is as mad as I am. The situation in Gaza is not acceptable. I appreciate voices that are coming out in our support, and I appreciate my friends here at the panel who came on a short notice, and I appreciate everything that they do. But I'm talking to you now, and I'm talking as one of you. What are you doing? What are we doing? What are we gonna be doing? Because we cannot be silent. I was on the media, and because I didn't condemn Hamas in the words that they wanted me to condemn Hamas with, throughout the day, they were putting my name, my voice, and saying she didn't condemn, making me a target. Making me a target, which is fine. I say make me a target. Because I do not answer to anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm sure you are in the same situation. Probably all of you are afraid. Probably all of you are running from one media to the other. But this is the time when we need to start focusing, organizing, and be able to hold everybody who is not speaking for us, who is calling us, who is calling us to be terrorists and scaring people off. I want you to pay attention to everything that is happening. On Friday, there were a lot of people who were afraid because the Jewish schools have sent letters to all the parents telling them, be careful, the Muslims are going to come out because there was a call by Hamas. Just imagine, Omar mentioned that young girl that was attacked, her family had to flee from their home.
It's lies.
It's not a lie. It's not a lie. This is the truth. I want you to all be careful because the media will make us sound like liars when the truth is with us. Okay? The LAUSD sent a letter again to all families. They had it on their landing page. I stand with Israel. And when I was told that they were sending letters to parents telling them that we're going to pay attention, we're going to be, looking for anti-Semitism, I picked up the phone and I called. And I said, you represent everybody in the city. You're increasing Islamophobia as far as I'm concerned. And I made them change that letter. And I made them change that time. But it was you build relations, you build alliances. They would have not listened to me had I not been able to work with them before. That I established the credit. I established a position where they would listen to me. And it's time for all of us to be active. There are things we can do individually, collectively. We can pray. We can support organizations that hopefully as soon as they're able to support families of Palestinians in Gaza on the ground. You know, I know Layla and Kinder USA is here, and be careful with organizations that are going to come after your money, but they're really not real organizations that are going to be helping Palestinians. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَقُلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. God is telling us, you know, do the deeds. Because God Almighty, His Prophet, and the believers are watching us, watching what we do. To me, that is a scary thing that I have to answer to Allah, to the Prophet, and all to the believers. And this is a message to each and every one of us. What are we going to do? We're going to have to really be accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Use the power, use your voice, use your time, volunteer. When Esty has her group at Jewish Voices for Peace knocking on doors of politicians and none of us is with them, come on. Al-Aqsa, Palestine, the lives of the people in Gaza is our responsibility as much as it is theirs. And we need to be able to act. We need to be able to organize. I know our chairman is looking into more ways so that we can come together and plan and strategize and get each and every one of you the opportunity to act. We need to be visible and active with our local cities, local schools, the state, nationally, even the media. You need to pick up the call, your phone. You need to email them. You need to make your voice heard. Finally, I'm just telling you, do not despair. Because I was losing, probably I already lost hope, but I didn't lose faith. Because my faith is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His holy book, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do you people think that you're going to actually stand and say, we believe, when you're not tested? This is a test beyond tests. So let's succeed. Let's stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the day of judgment and say, oh Allah, we did our best. And this is a responsibility that is individual. Do not tell yourself that, oh, you know, Salam and Impact are doing this. It is everybody's responsibility. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Dan, for those personal reflections, for the personal plea, and really all that you've done for our community, and our prayers and thoughts for you and your family. We'll just go ahead and we'll start with Mahmoud this time and have closing reflections.
Thank you, and thank you again for being here. If I want to just closing remarks regarding the Holocaust, it is not a Palestinian responsibility. It is a European responsibility. And the Europeans bear the guilt of the slaughter that has been perpetrated during World War II. It was regardless of how many tried. The Israelis tried actually to put the Palestinians il-ma'iyya, that the Mufti Haj Amin Husseini was a Nazi or supporter of the Nazis, and many other Zionists tried to smear the Palestinians. Once again, the smear campaign, I'm familiar with it from academia. They smear somebody, they say he or she is anti-Semitic, and after further investigation, thousands of dollars by the university investigating the claim, and they find that it is bunk, a junk accusation. And they do that all the time. So the European guilt, I am not going to take it upon myself. It's been perpetrated against me. This Holocaust is now being perpetrated by the Israelis against the Palestinians with the support of the silence and the egging on and don't stay restrained to the Israeli military, the strongest military in the Middle East, the fourth in the world, a nuclear power. It is going to be unrestrained. And they're smarting for revenge because they were caught off guard this time. They are going to be worse, and I dread the images that are going to be coming up. But it is not my guilt that the Jews were slaughtered by the Nazis. It's the Nazi guilt. It's the European silence. It is the European governments that refused to allow Jews to enter during the Holocaust. That they had no recourse but to come to Palestine, which they did not want to. Most of them did not want to come. It's a backward place, they say. But they refused them here. They refused them in other places. So we can avert that by, I'm not a doctor, but any doctor would tell you, if I want to treat a disease, I would go to the root cause of the problem. And this is the root cause, is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the continued ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, Masafer Yatta, Sheikh Jarrah, around Ramallah. 20 communities this year have been ethnically cleansed. Schools were destroyed. UN schools, European financed schools were destroyed. Settlers on the rampage, burning houses with their occupants. These, by the way, were American citizens. Where is the cry of the US government about the US Palestinian citizens being burnt alive in Tormasaya? So the hypocrisy has to stop, and I would urge everyone to be careful with all of the dehumanizing talk, with all the labels that they put on, so that we can turn the narrative around. And we are slowly doing that, but it is going to be time and time. And I was, in my student days, I thought 1985 was going to be the year when we are going to be winning, because apartheid South Africa was being dismantled, and we thought the next step would be Israeli apartheid. And indeed, as we dismantled South African apartheid, we took over Kirkhoff Hall, Murphy Hall at UCLA to force the divestment of UC from apartheid South Africa. And eventually, the whole country divested from South Africa, because apartheid and the treatments of the indigenous population is untenable. It's racist, it's apartheid. It's dehumanizing. And this is what's happening in Israel. They have transformed their military occupation into an apartheid regime. And everyone now agrees it's an apartheid regime. Not everyone, but major organizations, even Israeli organizations, recognize that what they have is an apartheid regime. And so as apartheid fell in South Africa, it will fall in Palestine. And it is going to be concerted effort, but it will fall, because apartheid is inhuman, is degrading, and it is time to stop that.
Thank you for your comments. So now let me add a European voice, a German voice. And I really thank you, Hala, for your question. And as I said, this is an opportunity to clarify the remarks that I made at the beginning. I was born 10 years after the Nazi regime. And I wrestled with that question all my life. And I've come to the conclusion that I am not guilty of the Holocaust, but I do have a special responsibility because of what my people did, and this is why I'm here. Because what happened to the Jews perpetrated by the German people is an atrocity that should not happen and cannot happen and must not happen to any people. Not Jews and not Palestinians and not anybody. And so when the Holocaust is in any way used, or the guilt being used to condemn genocide, then I think it is dishonoring the victims of the Holocaust. So I want to make that very clear, that speaking out against the Holocaust is not in any way a shield to condone other crimes, other genocides, quite the opposite. My own reflection as a German has given me that view to say, I must do whatever I can, whatever little I can, to prevent anything like this, the wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children, and people who are different, to not happen again. I'm just a small drop in a big ocean, but that is my responsibility as your sister, my friend, my sister, has just said. It is each of our responsibilities. So that's why I'm here this morning, not to use the Holocaust as a way to say I'm not condemning similar crimes, but just the opposite. So I hope that helps clarify your question.
Similarly, my comments regarding the struggles that we face within the Episcopal Church or the larger Christian community regarding anti-Semitism and our history of that are not meant in any way to justify what's going on or to try to side with or understand the pain that is felt over these issues. Like Hadab, I faced the struggle of what to say and how to say it. The Episcopal Peace Fellowship, which I mentioned earlier, had issued a press release with our views on this, and in it we refused to condemn Hamas because really as Christians we believe in nonviolence, and so all violence is abhorrible to us. We can abhor it, we can renounce it, but the whole idea of condemning, it just gets into this mutual condemnation. You condemn Israeli violence, you condemn Hamas violence, etc. We condemn all violence, and that should be sort of a starting point for where we as Christians are. We couldn't even get our own Episcopal news service to carry our press release because we refused to condemn. So I mean, these are some of the struggles that, and that's what I was trying to highlight. These are some of the struggles within the Christian churches to do this. And partially it's because, as I mentioned, that we don't have relations. We're not hearing the way we hear from the Jewish community. We're not hearing from the Muslim community. And this is not a Jewish-Muslim thing, but we're not hearing from the Palestinian community asking for our support and asking for us to be more vocal about those types of things. So, this is something that I hope we will be able to change. I'm seeing some change within Jerusalem itself. What they call the patriarchs and the heads of churches. It's about a dozen different churches some of them are historic, going back to the Greek Orthodox Church, which was the first, the Roman Catholic Church, etc. Some of these all issued a statement calling for ceasefire, calling for restraint, calling for an understanding of the context of these things and to deal with those issues. And on Tuesday of next week, they've called for churches all across the world to participate in a day of fasting and prayer. Join us. Join us in that fasting and prayer. I'm pleased that the church in South Africa, the Anglican Church in South Africa, which the Episcopal Church is in communion with, decided they were going to call Israel an apartheid state. And I'm hoping that my own Episcopal Church, when we meet next year, as I mentioned, will do the same. So there is action. There is action within Christian churches trying to do this, but we do need your support in amplifying that voice.
So my family fled pogroms in Ukraine. Most of my family came to Chicago, but my father's father took his wife and I think 3 kids at the time in the 20s to British Mandate Palestine. And a couple decades later, they sent their sons and daughters to do to other people what they fled from, something I will never understand. And while I'm not guilty of what is happening to Palestinians, I feel an acute responsibility, because the thing that we all need to remember about the Holocaust is what Jews say about it, which is never again. And let me make it abundantly clear that never again means never again for anybody. I think it's very important that we remind people that generations of Palestinians, as Adal was telling us, have been pushed into what is now the Gaza Strip. Over 80% of the residents are refugees that were displaced in 48 or in 67 that are being displaced again today. And we need to tell that to people when we're trying to explain what's happening here. Hamas is not the cause of the violence. Occupation and apartheid are the cause of the violence. U.S. support for this is the cause of the violence. So we need to say that the solution is a free Palestine. Can you all please join me in calling for a free Palestine? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give another round of applause for our very wonderful panelists. 4 points. Number one, MPAC was in the White House speaking to the National Security Council and made 3 points to them. Number one, what's happening in Gaza is a war crime and it's ethnic cleansing. And so you, the National Security Council, the White House, need to be ready to be held responsible for that war crime. Number two, assuming that you want to eliminate Hamas, what's next? Every time you go after one group that you deem terrorists, another group that becomes more radicalized, more extreme, rises from the ashes. Are you ready for that? And are we, the United States, the American people, ready for that? Are you disclosing that to the American public? Number three, this is Iraq all over again, in some ways. And what happened in Iraq, now estimates of up to 825,000 children were killed from the Iraq wars. Are you ready now to have the same thing happen in Gaza? Because, as was said, most of the population in Gaza is under the age of 19. This is what we conveyed to the White House, and we will continue to push on these points. And as I said before, the people in the government who are our allies need us to amplify our voice. So that goes to number two. Our responsibility is to continue talking to our members of Congress, our senators, our city council, our school districts, as Hedab alluded to, everyone and anyone, and our neighbors. And lastly, as we close, we're going to go to prayer, and there will be a janazah prayer for all who are deceased, and we'll make that prayer in their abstention. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.